Good afternoon. My name is Bob Schoepp, and I'm a member of the Edmonton Woodturning Guild. I would just like to mention to you that during this video, if you have any questions that come up, don't hesitate to get in touch with the Edmonton Woodturners Guild, and they will put you in touch with me to further discover the questions that you have and solutions for them. This afternoon, what this video about is open segmenting. It is not a video about how to do segmenting work, but it is a video about another method of doing open segmenting. And this method is very simple, very straightforward. It only involves one small jig and a table saw. Before we get into that, I would like to show you a couple of examples of segmented work that I have done. This is open segmented and was done with the table saw. You'll notice that all the segments on this vase are the same size. They're all 3/8 of an inch. Here I have a bowl, and you will notice that the segments vary as the bowl flares out. At the bottom I have a 1/4 inch segment, then a 3/8 open space, then a 1/2 inch open space, then a 5/8 inch open space, so that as the bowl flares out, the segments, the openings in the segments also flare out. The project that I'm working on today is a walnut vase. I have one ring to go yet, and that's the ring that we will use for the demonstration. Every ring here has openings in it, and they are all about 3 millimeter. This project came about simply because I got a lot of waste wood from a gentleman, scraps of walnut. So what I did is I cut them all down to 1 by 1, and I used them to make this vase. Now, what I should tell you, if you're doing segmented work from scraps, don't cut all your segments for one ring from one stick and then the segments for another ring from another stick, because what will happen is you will find that you will have specific colors for the different rings. What I do is I'll cut 2 segments from one stick, lay it aside, cut 2 segments from another stick, lay it aside, and so on. That way I get a mixture of segments, and it spreads out throughout the project, and you get this variegated look. You don't get the striations of specific colors. The secret, or the project that I'm working on, or the system that I'm working on, works a bit different than normal segmenting, where you have jigs where you set the segments into and you try and glue them all together. What I do is I take the wood and I laminate to it a piece of waste wood. Every stick is done this way. Then I will take my 8 segments and cut them and glue them together in a solid ring, the same as you would for any other segmented piece. The solid ring ends up looking like this. And then, of course, on the top you have your waste wood. Now, what happens during this process, this is one solid ring that stays in shape and stays perfectly balanced. What I do is take the table saw and cut exactly dead center down the glue line in each direction, which creates the open part of the segments. Now, for ease of explanation, you'll see here that I have marked the joints in the ring, and you can probably see that a little better on this particular camera over here. To make this whole system work, what I have done is made up a jig that goes on the table saw, and it's very straightforward. It is simply a piece of plywood or a piece of wood as a carrier, and then a rail on the front to hold the work against. The secret of this, and I'll move back to the other camera, that you have to be very, very careful about is that you'll notice above in the center line of this cut, I have a center line marked. So what you need to do is take, when you lay your ring in place, is line your center line of the jig up with the center line on the ring, and then when you move to the back, you'll notice that the center line of the joint will be in the center line of the cut. Then you simply take it, put it on the table saw, and run through to create the open part of the segments. So let's go over to the table saw and see what we can do. First and foremost, you want to set the depth of the cut, because if you set it too high, you're going to be making another ring. And I don't think any of us are interested in doing that. Then center the blade in your jig, and you should be ready to go. Center line on the jig matches the center line of the joint. The center line of the joint matches the center line of the cut. Here we can see the spaces, or the open part of the segmented joints now. But the beauty of this is the ring is still complete, it's still intact, and it's still whole. It's still rigid, so I can work on it in one piece, nothing moves, everything stays exactly where you want it to be. Now the one thing that I want to point out to you is that on this jig that I made, I laid some sandpaper and glued it into place. And this sandpaper, when I lay the ring on, it makes sure that the ring doesn't end up accidentally sliding or shifting while I'm doing the cuts. The sandpaper holds it in place. Now, just for your information, on this particular jig, I ended up cutting through the entire ring. If I was doing a bowl such as this here, I would end up with a bigger jig, and I would cut through only one half, move it, cut, move it, cut, move it, cut. So I would end up in this particular case with 12 particular cuts. Now the other thing that you might find yourself wondering about is, why can't I put a guide on the bottom of this that I can just drop into the slot on the table saw and use it so nothing shifts? That works fine if you're using only one size of blade for the open segmenting. If you are using several sizes in the same project like I did in this bowl, what you're going to find is that as you add the 1/8 inch, the saw blade crawls over, and suddenly you are no longer centered on the cut. And this is the reason that I use the fence. It allows me to add to the dado blade to make it a bit wider, and then adjust the fence so that the center line is always over the center line of the blade. And that's important. It's quite critical. If you're doing a ring that you're planning on a larger ring, center it over the center line and then simply cut through 1/2 of it. Cut through to this point, then back off, rotate it, and cut the next joint. In this particular case, since the rings are small and since the spaces are always the same, I simply cut all the way through in the first cut. Now that I have the spaces in the ring, it's time to get on with flattening this face off so I can mount it onto the project. Now, I unfortunately do not have a thickness sander, so I end up having to use a faceplate and temporarily mount my rings on the faceplate and flatten them that way. You'll notice here that I have a cross that is cut into the surface of this MDF faceplate, and it is dead center. And now to center the ring, all I have to do is to mount it so that the joints line up with the cuts in the MDF. Then I use a hot glue gun and I put a bead of glue on every segment. If it's a solid ring, I don't bother with every segment. I usually put 4 strips of glue on in the 4 quadrants. But because this is cut already, I end up gluing every piece into place. And sure enough, like usual, what's going to happen is I'm going to run out of glue stick just before I get finished. Just check it once more and make sure that all the joints are in line with the cuts that I have on the faceplate. We'll let the glue set up and then we'll put it on the lathe and face it off.
Perfect.
I've also rushed this process and then couldn't figure out why the thing wasn't in alignment, because the glue wasn't set.
So it's important to make sure that the glue has a chance to cool off and set.
Oh, you gotta let it cool. Okay. So we'll be back on the lathe here. Now at this point, I'll mount the ring. We'll face it off with a chisel, and then the sandpaper. Get my face mask on. Step out of the flyway. And bring this up to speed. And speed for me at this point is about 2,000 RPM. It seems to be fairly level, so what I'll do now is put a pencil line on it, sanding block to it, and get it flat.
What grade of sandpaper did you use, Bob?
80.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's 80, Stu, not 8.
Yeah, 80. Got it.
Now, at this point, we're ready to add this ring to the vase. We'll do a dry fit first. Now, I'm not sure that you can see this on your camera or not, but what I do when I'm turning segmented work, if it's 8 segments, I'll divide my waste block into 8 sections. And then I will put a half section and a half section, so that allows me to make the offset joint. In this particular case, on the faceplate, you'll notice that this cut goes straight vertical. And then I start lining things up. Now, to help me in that process, I'll use a laser that's mounted overhead. Set the laser line on the cut. And in this particular case, it's not going to line up with the dominant lines, so I offset it a half a turn to there. Tighten up. Just have a look all the way around. Make sure there are no issues. And what I've finally over the years learned to do is to number the quadrants on my faceplate so that I can return to the same place that I had it lined up to begin with, which obviously I don't. But there we are. Now I'll apply the glue, press it together, and leave it set. The glue that I'm going to use is a LePage's product. It's imported. It's called LePage Express. It dries in 10 minutes. So if it dries in 10 minutes, the thing you've got to be aware of is that it goes very quickly. When these two pieces of wood contact each other, you probably have about 15 seconds to make any adjustments. After that, you're done. Now, I try and keep the glue to a minimum here, because if I end up with too much glue on it, obviously it's going to squeeze out and it's going to get into the segments and it's not going to look that great. So I'll keep it to a minimum. You know, I'm developing a tremor, and it doesn't help me. put the pressure on from the tailstock, set my egg timer for 10 minutes, and then we can get back to work. I'll cut that. I've just had a question about using the Dado blade to make wider segments. That is the case in this particular bowl, where I started from 1/4 inch to 3/8 to 1/2 inch to 5/8. I used this particular jig to make those cuts. And as you can see from it, there's various sizes in here. But the one thing that you should notice is that the center line is right there, and that's what everything gets aligned to. Now, further to that, some of you might find yourselves thinking, how come the edges are so clean when I cut this with a Dado blade? I guess there'd be two explanations for that. It's a tungsten carbide blade, so it's very sharp. It does a clean cut. But secondly, what you need to remember in a bowl like this is that this isn't the edge of the piece that's cut. It's not the edge of the cut. This is actually a square block. And a lot of where there would be tear out is simply turned away when you finally finish the bowl. And I have not had a problem with tear out in any way. The system has worked well for me. Timer just went off, and it's time to look at the next step. Now, my test for a good glue joint is to see if the white glue is superior to the hot glue, and I don't try and take the hot glue off. I just back off the piece, and if the hot glue pulls off, then I'm assuming that we have a good joint here. Might be a bit elementary, but that's the way it works. I like to get rid of the hot glue because I'm not really interested in it melting onto my chisels as I'm doing any work. I have enough other things gumming up my chisels. Now I simply reverse the work, take off the faceplate, bring the bottom of the vase over onto the headstock, now it seems almost kind of a shame to take this waste wood, cut it off, and trash it after all the work that it's done in holding everything in place and holding everything steady, but I'm afraid that's what's going to happen. Again, we'll take this up to about 2,000 RPM. find it really annoying when you forget to cut one ring to the actual size that it's supposed to be, and then when everything is glued together you look at it and it becomes very obvious. There we are, cut down to size. Now, I'll just check my plan. The size, the outside diameter here is 102 millimeters. So I mark the outside diameter at 102 millimeters. Then I come back 7.5 millimeters for my inside diameter. I put a little divot in here at the 102. Now when I do my final turning, that will be the gauge that I go to. And then, of course, you cut down the inside. Now, in segmented turning, in open segmented turning, this is one cut that I don't rush. I take it very slowly and very carefully. One thing that I find with open segmenting, the piece of work acts like a pump and it just sucks all the shavings inside. course, as I get closer to the finished piece of joining these two pieces together, I better check the ID on this one and make sure that it ties into the ID of the other one. The millimeter or so to go. One more cut probably do it. Now, let's just check one more time. I think that unexpected little catch there may have made a difference. And it looks like I need to take down a wee bit on the top to get these two teed up and together. Now, before I do that, I am going to flatten this so that I can glue the base to the top of the vase. I'm not certain whether you can see this on the camera or not, but the reason for putting the pencil marks on this area is to make sure that it's flat. Where there is no lead showing, obviously, is the sandpaper is working, and in the inside I've still got a bit of the pencil lines or the lead showing, so obviously it's not quite flat. So I will just continue to sand until that disappears. Okay. The measurement on there. Take this off, match the top of the vase to the bottom here, and then we should be ready to glue it together. It's annoying when you get a chip of sawdust in, and I like to make sure that I take them out because otherwise things aren't sitting completely snug on the spindle. Okay. Now with a little bit of luck, we can trim this out. Have them both the same size. And carry on. Still a bit to go. Here we are, ready to put it together. I will mount the bottom of this vase on the tailstock. Top is mounted on the headstock. Again, we turn on the laser, set this so that it's dead center. Quarter offset. Some of these joints are awesome and some I'd rather not talk about. And that should be it. Now in this particular case I'm going to put the glue on the top because that ends up on, when you're looking at the vase from above, you wouldn't see any glue that might interrupt a finish that you're planning on putting on. Okay. 10 minutes, let the glue set. Then what I'll do is I'll trim the outside of the vase down completely so that it has its final shape. Then I'll cut off the tailstock or the waste wood at the bottom, the waste block at the bottom, grip it with a chuck, cut off the waste wood at the top, and then I'm ready to oil the project. Now some of you may find yourselves wondering, where did I get the idea to try open segmented turning in this fashion? It actually happened within our club when one of our members mentioned to me that he was having problems with the jig as far as getting everything in alignment, holding it there, getting the glue in place, and then setting the next one on and pressing everything into place. There were just too many little pieces that could slide around, move, and slip. And I found myself thinking, well, there's got to be a better way. So I started thinking about it, and there's no better way of keeping things in place than with a solid ring. So that was my solution, was to glue on a bit of waste wood, produce a solid ring, and in that particular case, you have something complete and entire to work with right through the process. So it has worked out well for me. I enjoy working with it. It is a little more time consuming. I suppose you're leaving a few more shavings on the floor, but I don't think a bit of spruce on the floor is going to make all that much difference anyway. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. Thank you for your time.